What happens when the silence between a pilot and his engineer says more than 1,000 words? What if Charles Leclerc's now or never is not just motivation, but a direct threat? Stay until the end, because today we're going to gut the explosive tension that's about to make Ferrari implode from within. Subscribe to continue uploading more of this type of content now, if we continue. Abu Dhabi. Last event on the 2025 Formula 1 calendar. An artificially illuminated circuit, fireworks decorating the sky, engines turned off, and a podium celebrating the end of the season. But while the world celebrated, in the Ferrari pit, there was a diametrically opposite scene, a silence that weighed more than any defeat on the track. There were no screams. There were no open discussions or table banging. It wasn't necessary, because the silence, that was the loudest scream of all. After 24 races, Ferrari not only closed another year without a title, but it did so with an internal emotional and structural fracture that was exposed to the entire world. The image was not a checkered flag, nor champagne bursting on the podium. It was Lewis Hamilton sending a message of gratitude to his team over the radio, and no one answering. Not a single word, for more than a minute. On any other team, that would be a simple forgetfulness. But at Ferrari, after a year full of tensions, communication failures, philosophical differences, and broken promises, that silence was a sentence of emotional divorce between driver and engineering. And he wasn't the only one. At the same time, Charles Leclerc ended the season with a statement that set off all the alarms. It's now or never. A short phrase, but it contains a 5-year history of accumulated frustrations. To believe over and over again in a project that always promises and always fails. To the media, it could have seemed like an inspiring closing. For Maranello, it was a direct warning. Either in 2026 everything changes, or Leclerc leaves. The irony of all this is that 2025 was not supposed to be a year like this. It was the beginning of a new stage with the arrival of the 7-time world champion. Hamilton was supposed to bring not only speed, but experience, order, leadership. Instead, what arrived was a clash of cultures. A driver accustomed to Mercedes' pinpoint precision, now immersed in an environment where passion sometimes interferes with structure, where silences are not always strategic and emotions are closer to the surface. Ferrari, meanwhile, continues to carry the weight of its history. Each season without titles is not just a failed campaign. It is an emotional burden that increases on everyone's shoulders, from the engineers to the pilots, including sports management. And in a year as long, as tense and as demanding as 2025, that weight was transformed into fissures. Fissures that, in Abu Dhabi, became open fractures. Hamilton and Leclerc, two completely different drivers, agreed on one thing: the limit has been reached. Lewis expressed it with his growing boredom with his engineer. Charles, with a phrase that, although brief, has the power to change the course of Ferrari history if it is not taken with the seriousness it deserves. Ferrari's collapse in 2025 is not technical, is not aerodynamic, is not strategic. It's human, it's emotional, it is structural, and for that reason, it is even more dangerous. Because while a car can be redesigned in the wind tunnel, rebuilding trust between people is infinitely more difficult. Are you prepared in Maranello to face this reconstruction? Or was this silence we saw in Abu Dhabi just the prelude to an even greater implosion? To understand Ferrari's internal collapse in 2025, it is necessary to delve into one of the most invisible, but most determining aspects in modern Formula 1, the relationship between a driver and his race engineer. It's not just the one who gives instructions. It is his second voice, your companion in the darkness of the visor. It's ground wire. And when that bond is broken, what collapses is not just the strategy, trust collapses. Throughout the season, Lewis Hamilton and Riccardo Adami represented two worlds that never managed to meet. Two opposing styles. Two completely incompatible work cultures. And what we saw in Abu Dhabi was nothing more than the inevitable outcome of a conflict that had been brewing since the first round of the year. On the radio, the symptoms were evident. Messages that, far from providing clarity, generated more noise. Instructions that arrived late or that were simply not necessary. A voice that, for Hamilton, hindered rather than guided. The breaking point came when Adami notified him of a second warning for track limits. Lewis' reaction was instant, raw, visceral. "Let me know when I get the first one, man. Shit, man." And then came the Britain's most worrying phrase of the entire season. In a later interview, he made it clear, "My environment needs to be reviewed. There are people who may need to be in other roles to optimize the team. Everything has to be evaluated." In other words, Hamilton is calling for a change of engineer. And if Ferrari doesn't give it to him, the bomb has already been activated. But can Ferrari afford to lose Adami, one of its most experienced technicians? And what message would you send to Leclerc, who has been working with the same technical environment for years without major changes, if now everything is broken to accommodate Lewis? This is not just a clash of styles. It is a silent battle for power within Ferrari. And as often happens in Maranello, when internal struggles prevail over sporting logic, performance on the track is the first thing to be sacrificed. Ferrari does not have an engine problem. You have a communication problem. And in Formula One, that can be even more dangerous. What happens at Ferrari in 2026 will not depend solely on its car. It will not depend only on its power unit, its aerodynamics, or its lap times. It will depend on something more complex, more human, more volatile: the reconstruction of its internal ecosystem. Lewis Hamilton made it clear: not with a slam of the door, but with surgical diplomacy, my environment needs to be reviewed. There are people who may need to be in other roles to optimize the team. Direct translation: he wants another career engineer. And even more so, he wants to reconfigure the entire team around him within Ferrari. But this is not as simple as replacing Riccardo Adami. We are not talking about an operational change, but a complete restructuring of Hamilton's core work. A core that, until now, has operated with a very different mentality than the one he needs to perform at his highest level. Hamilton is a driver who doesn't just race, lead, demand. He builds his environment like an elite athlete who needs every piece around him to function with pinpoint precision. He did it at McLaren. He perfected it at Mercedes. And now, at Ferrari, he faces a culture that values tradition, hierarchy, rigid structure. And that can be a monumental obstacle if he doesn't adapt to the speed he needs. So what real options does Ferrari have? There are three possible paths, each with different consequences. The first option is the most logical and the most complicated: changing Hamilton's race engineer. This would involve breaking with years of internal method, reassigning key personnel, and finding someone who not only understands Lewis technically, but can establish the same emotional and strategic connection with him that he had with Bonington. Are there people like that in Maranello? Few. Are they willing to do it? Is not clear. The second option is riskier: bring in external talent. This would mean bringing in someone from outside Ferrari, perhaps with a background at Mercedes or McLaren, to adapt the environment to Hamilton's needs. The problem here is twofold. On the one hand, that decision would be perceived internally as a blow to Ferrari culture. And on the other hand, it could generate tensions with Charles Leclerc, who has been working with the same staff for years, and could interpret this movement as a sign of favoritism towards the new signing. And finally, there is the third option: do nothing. Trust that the relationship between Hamilton and Adami can be repaired, that the environment adjusts itself, that the experience of a year together manages to iron out rough edges. But that is, perhaps, the most dangerous option, because we have already seen what happens when you don't act in time. Because in 2025, the disconnection was total. And repeating that mistake in 2026, with a new technical era underway, could doom Ferrari before the season even starts. And that brings us to the central question: what is really at stake in 2026? It's not just another season. It is the beginning of a new technical cycle that will redefine Formula One for years. New hybrid engines, new aerodynamic rules, new opportunities to break with current hierarchies. And Ferrari, after 2 decades of waiting, has a historic window in front of it to return to dominance. But to take advantage of it, you need cohesion. You need clarity in your leadership. It needs an internal structure that works with the same harmony as a well-balanced car. And that doesn't just depend on the car they build. It depends on the decisions you make now. Because if Hamilton enters 2026 with an engineer with whom he does not understand, with an environment that frustrates him, and with a technical management that does not listen to his needs, then everything that Ferrari has developed in the wind tunnel will be buried under the weight of its own internal errors. And if Leclerc, at the same time, feels that he is not being heard, that the team is revolving too much around Hamilton, or that his own promise of success continues to be postponed, he could make an irreversible decision: leave. Break the bond. Find a new project that does value you as an absolute leader. That is the real risk scenario for Ferrari in 2026. Not losing races, but losing its two pillars: to his past and his future. And do it just when the regulations open a door that will not be repeated for a long time. Formula One does not forgive indecision. Opportunities last a season. The pilots sometimes a contract. And words, although diplomatic, usually have an expiration date. Ferrari has until March 2026 to act, to redesign not only its car, but its organizational DNA. And if you don't, history will repeat itself. Again, Ferrari has reached a turning point, not only in sports, but in humans. What we saw in Abu Dhabi was not a racing error, nor a technical failure, nor even a bad strategy. It was the final symptom of something that has been brewing for years, an internal disconnection that threatens to collapse everything from within. Lewis Hamilton is not just any driver. It is a symbol. His arrival at Ferrari was to mark the rebirth of the Scuderia, the return of the golden times, the perfect union between the most iconic team in history and one of the best talents this sport has ever seen. But today, instead of celebrating that fusion, we are witnessing the disagreement of two worlds that do not end up speaking the same language. And Charles Leclerc, that young man who was the great bet for the future, today stands with disturbing clarity. He is no longer willing to wait. He no longer wants to listen to renewal speeches, technical promises, or internal justifications. He wants results, and he wants them now. Because if not, you will look for those results elsewhere. And therein lies the danger. Because in 2026 there will be no room for excuses. It will be the most crucial season in decades. A new technical era will begin, and with it, paths will open that only truly prepared teams will know how to navigate. If Ferrari enters that era divided, fragmented, with its leaders at odds and its technical structure in tension, then it will not only lose another opportunity. He could be condemned to remain a legend of the past, but never of the present. Subscribe to continue uploading more of that content. Now you really think about all this.